one of the commands on the 10 Commandment tablets, saying, honor thy father and thy mother. Honor your father and your mother. Because this is the first commandment of promise, that it should go well. Remember, this is a commandment that is given on Mount Sinai, when they had just come out of the bondage of Egypt. And it will take them another 38 years to get to the promised land. By the time they get to the promised land, a boy who was 2 years old on Mount Sinai is now 38. If the Bible tells us those are the people that entered the promised land. Anyone who was above 40 died in the wilderness, except Joshua and Caleb. But those that were young, those that were still young, that heard these words from Moses, who were still 2, 3, 1, are the ones that made it to the promised land. And Paul reminds them that in that land they should have long life. They should obey their parents. Now remember, this is a letter that is written not to an individual, but to the church. So in other words, it is the umbrella that is being discussed here, that it may go well with you. Obey, honor your father and your mother. And it is in that context that we come to our topic of today, of verse 4. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. In other words, Paul is addressing all of us in this one passage. Children should obey their parents. Both father and mother should be honored by the children. But also in return, fathers, which in Hebrew theology was both father and mother. If you read, for example, Proverbs chapter 1, verse 8, Solomon writes that children, or my son, do not neglect the words from your father, nor instructions from your mother. In other words, in Hebrew, understanding the instructions to children could come from both the father and the mother. And therefore, these two should raise their children in fear of the Lord. That's why our topic is about the Lord bringing them up in the Lord. And so, fathers, do not provoke your children. Those of us who come from the Ngoni tribes of Malawi, whether from the north or from the center or from the south, you know how harsh our parents could be. And we were very sure that was a very good upbringing of kids. But in the Bible, do not provoke them. Do not provoke the young ones. Because provoking them would either discourage them or will also yield anger. So when the children are angry and the parents are angry, together these two people that are angry will make disaster. Do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and in the instruction of the Lord. In 1995, we had gone to Livingstonia SDA Church to sing. Our friend who we used to sing together in secondary school had become a pastor at Livingstonia SDA Church. And so our quartet, having finished Form 4, we went from all parts of Malawi. We met at Chitimba, and there we walked the Gorodi Way, 21 bends, 17 kilometers going up to get to Livingstonia SDA Church, where we would have a program on Saturday. So on Friday we were walking towards Livingstonia. When we walked about maybe 10 to 12 kilometers going up the hills, the one who was guiding us showed us a very beautiful falls. Those of you who have been to Livingstonia, you know that falls called Manjere Falls. Some of us might not have been there, but maybe when we read from the tourist guide, we know about Manjere Falls, and he he was telling us a sad story of a young girl that had just finished Form 4, and they discovered that she was pregnant, and the father in anger beat her up and beat her up and beat her up and told her, from now you are no longer my daughter, go wherever you want to go, I don't want to see you. And in anger and in bitterness and in disappointment and in discouragement, this girl took her bag and said, since you don't want me, I'm going wherever you say I'm going. And went straight to Manchebe Falls and jumped. It was a painful story as we were told that day. We realized that children cannot be children forever. There are times when they become adults. Some children become adults when they are still younger than others. But in the long run, children also become adults. Some become adults at 12, others at 8, others even earlier. Those of us who are immigrants in this country know that sometimes we leave our kids alone at a very tender age because everyone wants to go and chase the American dollar. And so they become adults even before we know that they are adults. While we're waiting for them to become adults at 18 or at 21, they became adults when they were still in elementary school, taking care of themselves, preparing their own foods, washing their own clothes, taking care of themselves in the night when the parents have gone for shifts, taking care of themselves during daytime when the parents have gone for shifts. And so they make adult decisions, and we cannot blame them, nor do we blame ourselves as elders, as the leaders, as the parents, when they make those decisions. But while they are still young, as my wife quoted Ellen White's writing. Actually, Ellen White mentions in chapter 12 of the book that we mentioned, The Adventist Home, that at 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years, the character of the child is made. So while we're waiting for them to grow a little older so that we can teach them, we can instruct them the ways of life, their mind is already made up by the time we tell them. And so it becomes hard for us to instruct our kids. It is even harder for us as parents to instruct our kids in this age, where knowledge flows when they are still very young. By the time they start talking, they already know almost 80% of what they would know through the TVs that we leave around for them. They watch everything. There's a documentary that has just been going on this week on many social media about cartoons promoting homosexuality. And we wonder why our kids seem to be raising feminine sons and masculine daughters. There are things that they watch that we as parents have never watched. And their upbringing is made up more from the TV than from our instructions. Today I want to say, let's go back to our kids and let's talk about it. It's never too late to talk about it. Some of us who grew up in Malawi, our parents started talking to us about important things when we were already grown up. But we listened to them and we changed some of the things that we could have changed. We didn't change everything. Let's also go and talk to our kids. They might change some of the perspectives that they know, that they have raised knowing in this land. As fathers, verse 4, Ephesians chapter 6, do not provoke them to anger. Another version says, do not exasperate them. Now, how do you exasperate them? In this day and age, influencers are everywhere. It's not only you as a father that would influence your kids. Your kids can be influenced by anybody. Uncle T here influences our kids to play piano. Uncle Mwenda influences our kids when he teaches lesson, when he preaches. As we conduct songs in this church, we influence our kids. As we sing, we influence our kids. As we tell children's story, we influence our kids. As we stand and tell about giving tithes and offerings, we influence our kids. Our leaders here have taught us how we should give the envelopes to our children. They should be the ones putting the money in the plate so that we are influencing them. Positive influence. We need to do more than that. Let's involve them in all the programs that we have in our different departments, not only when it is Children's Day, but every other time we have a program. Let's try to involve our kids in one way or another, influencing them. We influence them by what we do. We influence them by what we talk. We influence them by what we post. Sometimes you say it's my space, but your space is influencing my kid. And so let's take responsibility of our space. Let's do it positively. Let's not add to disappointment and to anger of our own children. Paul, writing to the Ephesians, reminds them, fathers, don't be harsh with the young ones, but instead discipline them in the Lord. Don't just discipline them, but discipline them in the Lord. I mentioned before about the Ngonis, how they can discipline by beating hard, so that the kid can grow up into a responsible adult. And that responsible adult will continue beating their children on every small thing. The Ngonis easily use the back side of the hand while you are talking and they're asking you, so what happened already? All of a sudden you find that you have already been slapped. Someone posted that the kids of today don't know what we went through. In the past, you could be beaten for anything. You could be beaten if you have answered. You could be beaten if you have remained silent. You could be beaten if you have done something good. You could be beaten if you have done something bad. There was just no way you could know that now I'm not going to be beaten. And so to beat the system, when we are coming from school, sometimes we would take notebooks and put them inside our shorts, so that in case I will be beaten, it will be the books that will be beaten. Looks like they understood too. The parents understood it very fast, so they stopped beating by hands. They started taking the belt out from their pants, so that when they are beating, even if they are not books, you will still feel that I'm being beaten here. Now, beating is not discipline. You don't need to beat in order to show that you have disciplined someone. Discipline is talk, words. Let's talk when something has gone wrong, disciplining them and instructing them in the Lord. Our cultures are good. There's no culture that is inferior to the other. All cultures of the world are good, but not all are godly. And so, in our disciplining our kids, let's remove some of the ungodly things that come from there. It's a strange thing for a child born in America to practice tribalism. It can only come from someone who had instructed that child. Although we are here in America, but my son, we come from Zimba district. And my daughter, don't get married to someone from Kasungu and the like. And kids will follow. It is not supposed to be like that. Real Christians accommodate everybody. Real Christians discipline their kids in the Lord, not only in the culture. When there are some bad things coming from our cultures, let's discard them so that we can embrace Christianity and move forward with it. Jesus Christ said, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it. Take it out. If your right arm causes you to sin, cut it out. I would say the same today, that if we have something that we love and cherish in raising our kids up, but it's causing them to sin, to be in discipline, not to be instructed in the Lord. Let's learn to stop it so that things can go well with us, as Paul writes, so that things can go well in the land where we live. When Paul wrote this letter to the Ephesians, his real point had already been stated in chapter 1. And when he came to chapter 2, he had concluded his real point, and that is, all of us human beings are sinners. There's no one who is better than the other. And therefore, we have been saved by grace. It is by grace alone that we have salvation. And so by the time he comes to chapter 5, talking about husbands and wives loving one another and submitting to one another. And when he comes to chapter 6, where children should obey their parents and that their parents should instruct them in the knowledge of the Lord, it's only because grace has fallen upon us. And it's because having that grace, we can move forward. What is it that we are teaching our children? Does it reflect grace? Does it reflect salvation? Does it reflect Christ? As next week is coming and we'll have different speakers talk about some topics that we have shared with each other. Let's look towards having Christ being at the center of our marriages. If Christ will be at the center of our marriages, our wives will easily submit to the husbands. Our husbands will easily love, and our parents will easily discipline the kids without exasperating them to anger or to discouragement. I love it when I hear the stories that our friends here talk to the kids, and as they talk these stories, listen to the kids. The kids listen very well, and they hear what we say. And if you ask after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you find that the lesson that had been given 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, is still running in their minds. Let's continue being positive to our kids. Let's continue bringing them up in the discipline and in the instructions of the Lord. Because at the end, Paul finishes by saying, these who have been disciplined in the Lord, these who have loved in the Lord, these who have been loved in the Lord, these who are submitting to one another in the Lord, will finally put on the armor of God, because we know that we are still in this world. The devil is very clever. And this is in this chapter. The devil is very clever, and he knows that if he hits at the family, he has hit the church. And if he has hit the church, he has finished the mission of God. And so, me and you, let's put on the whole armor that God has given us. Faith, let's use faith so that the devil doesn't come closer to us. Let us not use flesh and blood to decide the things of God. The authority that we have over our kids should be the authority of the Lord. It should not be the authority of a Kumbuka, or authority of a Ngoni, or authority of a Lomwe, or a Chewa, or the authority of the American, but it should be the authority of the Lord. Let the Lord lead in our families. Let him be the pillar of our families. When we have wronged each other, remember, we have both been saved by grace. And so, let's forgive one another. And let forgiveness come as fast as possible. Don't wait until someone is exasperated to offer forgiveness to our wives, to our husbands, to our kids. The same thing when it comes to the church. Whereas we are worshiping together, there may be times that we have wronged one another. Sometimes we tell each other that you have wronged me. Sometimes we don't. But let us forgive one another, knowing that all of us have been saved by grace, and that grace can reach out to any one of us. And so let us move on, knowing that the Lord can be the center of our church. And we will not put any human being as the center. But once the Lord is the center of our families and be the center of our church, these that are mentioned in chapter 6 of Ephesians will make a lot of sense to us. It will be a blessing if all of us come together and grow in the Lord. Whatever it is that we do outside the church, know that it reflects on our children. And since our wish is that our children should grow in the Lord, I promise to be a good father, not only of my kids in the home, but my kids in the church too. And that when sometimes anger overtakes, that my fellow fathers will stop me and say, hey Father, that is anger, don't exasperate us. Because in the Lord, it should be discipline and instruction, not anger. Most of us as church leaders, sometimes we are easily taken by emotions. And sometimes our emotions go far and wide. Sometimes issues of 3 years ago, people will still be writing them on Facebook and on Twitter and on WhatsApp. Forgive. That's your obligation as a Christian. And forget. And embrace the brother or sister who wronged you, so that we can continue growing in the Lord. Lastly, the children that are being mentioned here can be all of us. Not only the children in age, but all of us are children in the Lord. And so as the Lord disciplines us, as Hebrews 12 tells us that the Lord disciplines the kids that he loves. As the Lord disciplines us, we emulate from the Lord to discipline one another as we are growing in the Lord. Accept the discipline that the children of God give you, because that brings comfort, that brings encouragement, and that brings growth in our Christian journey. As we move from today, as we go on in our different directions, remember 3 things. Number 1, that the Lord loves us, as the song that Elder Katundu and Mama Katundu sang. The Lord loves us so much that he gave us grace, that by his grace we have salvation. And that brings us to number 3. Okay, number 1, the Lord loves us. Number 2, he gave us grace. Number 3, he gave that grace for us to administer to one another. Let's administer that grace to one another in the love of the Lord, forgiving and moving forward in the Lord. It will be joy when we get to heaven and we see that Malawi Michiana church members are in heaven. Not only us as men, not only us as women, but men, women, and children, fathers, mothers, and kids, all of us saved by grace and enjoying life in heaven. That's the reason why we started with that song, Upese Zachifundo. The English words and the Chichewa words are very different if you can read it. But now let me get to the Chichewa hymn, saying, Tipese Zachifundo, Ziminitinga Zakorore. In other words, even if we sow unkindness, we still harvest unkindness. So therefore, let us sow kindness. Then he says, Odi mwana atakwa chitangozi, ndikuswa chikho chomwera. Odi mpaka muzita kumukalipira ndimkwiyo. These are important questions that song brings up in that song. In that song, if you listen to it very well, it is actually a song of family life. It is telling us that it is possible in our families to be kind to one another. Kind words heal. Sometimes when we come from work after a long shift, after all the stress that a shift have given you, you get home only to be frustrated more. Let's make our homes heaven on earth. And then when we have spent a whole week at work or in school with all frustrations, we come to the house of the Lord and then we are frustrated more. Let us make this house paradise on earth, and the Lord will be blessed in this house. And the Lord's name will come from here and go to many people out there. And this place will become a gateway to heaven for many people that watch us, that see us, that learn from us as we have known today, that you can be influencers without even saying a word. May the Lord help us today. May the Lord bless us. May the Lord move with us. May his grace continue showering us in our families and our kids, that we all can continue growing in his grace up to the last day. God bless us this afternoon in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen.